The announcement hit the station like a badly timed alarm clock, loud enough to rattle the walls and formal enough to sound offended by its own urgency. I was halfway through a nutrient bar that tasted like regret when the voice echoed through every corridor, every lab, every quiet corner where beings pretended not to eavesdrop. Due to an unexpected compatibility failure, this research station will be entering shutdown protocol within 12 standard cycles unless a suitable human volunteer presents themselves immediately for cross-species evaluation. I remember blinking, chewing, and swallowing in that exact order, because the word human has a way of snapping your attention into place when you're the only one around. The corridors filled with the subtle sounds of panic from species that express fear through color shifts, clicking mandibles, or aggressive silence. I, on the other hand, did what humans tend to do when faced with an announcement that definitely should have come with a warning label. I raised my hand. I didn't even wait for the explanation that followed, the one that tried to clarify the phrase cross-species evaluation with a dozen polite scientific euphemisms. My arm was already in the air, elbow locked, fingers stretched like I was back in school volunteering to answer a question I absolutely did not know the answer to. A dozen heads turned toward me. A few eye stalks swiveled. One being dropped their tablet. Somewhere behind me, another human whispered, "You're insane," with the kind of admiration usually reserved for people who touch clearly labeled buttons. The voice cut out mid-sentence. There was a pause so long it felt ceremonial. Then a much softer voice, no longer broadcast but carried through the open chamber, said, You are volunteering?" I finally looked toward the source of the announcement. She stood at the center platform, posture rigid, clearly rehearsed composure cracking just enough to be noticeable. Even without knowing her species tells, I could tell this was not how she expected this to go. Her kind did a lot of preparation, a lot of planning. Humans, apparently, were still a blind spot. "Yeah," I said, lowering my hand like this was the most normal thing in the universe. "You said you needed one?" There were whispers. Fast ones? Urgent ones. Someone began frantically pulling up regulations. Another alien made a sound that I later learned translated loosely to "This is why we warned you about them." She stepped closer, scanning me with a device that hummed nervously. "You did not request clarification. You did not review the consent brief. You did not ask about risks." I shrugged. "Station shuts down if nobody steps up, right?" "Yes," she said slowly. "And you asked for a human?" "Yes." I smiled. Seems straightforward. It was not, apparently, straightforward at all. Her eyes widened just a fraction, and that fraction did a lot of heavy lifting. "The evaluation involves intimate data collection, emotional profiling, behavioral compatibility metrics." "Okay. And prolonged direct interaction." "Still okay. And there may be discomfort." I thought about the nutrient bar. I've had worse lunches. That was when the room shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. I could feel it, the way everyone else leaned in, the way the air changed when a variable entered a controlled environment. She stared at me like I'd just rewritten her research notes by existing. "You understand," she said carefully, "that humans typically require extensive preparation before consenting." "Do they?" I asked. "Because nobody told me." That earned a few scattered clicks and whistles from the observation deck. She looked back at them, then at me, then down at her device like it might explain why a human was standing there so calm about something that clearly made everyone else uncomfortable. "This was not how it was supposed to begin," she admitted. "Story of my life," I said. The announcement system chimed again, helpfully reminding everyone that the shutdown timer was still very much counting down. Lights dimmed a fraction, just enough to make the stakes feel real. She took a breath, straightened her posture, and nodded once, decisively, like someone accepting a challenge she had not trained for. "Very well. You will accompany me." I followed without hesitation, aware of the stares burning into my back. Somewhere along the way, it occurred to me that I probably should have asked more questions. Not enough to stop walking, just enough to acknowledge the thought before ignoring it completely. The corridor toward the evaluation wing was quieter, insulated from the station's collective anxiety. She walked a step ahead of me, clearly trying to reassemble her professional demeanor. "You step forward instantly," she said, not looking back. "Yeah. Why?" I considered lying, something noble or strategic. Instead, I went with the truth. "You sounded like you needed help." She slowed. "Just a little. This test," she said, "is not merely procedural. It is personal." I leaned against the wall as we stopped outside a sealed door covered in warnings written in 6 languages. "Good thing I'm great with personal." She turned then, really looked at me, studying my expression like it was another data point she didn't have a category for yet. "Humans are supposed to be cautious," she said quietly. I grinned. "We are. Just not about the same things." The door hissed open, lights inside warming to life. Whatever was waiting beyond it, whatever awkward questions or misunderstood signals or catastrophically misread confidence levels lay ahead, I had already crossed the point of no return. And judging by the way she hesitated before stepping inside with me, either of us was prepared for what my raised hand had just started. The room sealed behind us with a sound that was far too final for something that was supposedly just an evaluation. The lights adjusted themselves automatically, dimming from clinical white to something warmer, almost considerate, as if the station itself knew this was about to get uncomfortable. She paused just inside the chamber, fingers hovering over a console like it might bite her. I took the opportunity to look around. The space was larger than I expected, circular, layered with instruments that tried very hard to look neutral, while absolutely failing. There were seats positioned closer than strictly necessary, translucent panels humming softly, and a single table in the center that screamed this was designed by someone who had studied intimacy exclusively through academic papers. "This chamber," she began, then stopped, cleared her throat, and tried again, "is calibrated for cross-species interaction. Feels cozy," I said. "It is not meant to feel anything," she replied automatically, then frowned as if realizing how that sounded. "I mean, it is meant to feel appropriate. It's doing its best," I assured her. She tapped the console, and a panel slid open, projecting a cascade of symbols that rearranged themselves into a language I could read. I recognized enough bureaucratic phrasing to know what was coming before she even spoke. "Before we begin," she said very carefully, "you must confirm consent for a series of assessments." "How many?" She hesitated. "That depends on your responses." "That's ominous." "They are standard," she said quickly. "Mostly." I raised an eyebrow. "Mostly." She didn't meet my eyes as she activated the first protocol. "Please be aware that some questions may be considered invasive by human cultural standards. Go big or go home," I said, settling into the seat opposite her. Her head snapped up. "That is not an option available within this chamber." "Pity." The first question appeared between us, floating in soft blue text. "Please describe your preferred method of emotional bonding." I blinked. "That's question 1? "Yes." "No warm-up? No how was your day?" She glanced at the display, then back at me. "This is the warm-up." I leaned back, thinking. Talking helps. Humor. Shared experiences. Trust. The display pulsed. "Clarify," she said, stylus poised. I added. "Listening. Being present. Not treating someone like a checklist." Her stylus froze. "That last one," she said slowly, "is not listed as a variable. Should be." The panel pulsed again, brighter this time, and somewhere in the walls I heard a faint chime that sounded suspiciously like surprise. She moved on quickly, fingers flying as if afraid the system might ask follow-up questions. "Next. How do humans signal romantic interest?" "That's a trick question," I said. "We're terrible at it. That contradicts our data. Your data hasn't dated humans." She frowned but didn't argue. "Answer, please." "Eye contact. Attention. Effort. Sometimes jokes that land terribly." The display shifted colors. And physical proximity? She asked, a bit too quickly. Context matters, I said. Consent matters. Mood matters. Her breathing changed. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. You emphasize consent frequently, she observed. Yeah. Kind of important. That is reassuring, she said, almost to herself. The next set of questions escalated fast. Preferences, boundaries, reactions to stress. Each one framed with clinical detachment that failed to hide how personal they were. I answered honestly, occasionally deflecting with humor when things veered too close to the edge of awkward. At one point, a question asked how I would respond if a partner expressed uncertainty during bonding. I'd stop, I said immediately. The room went very quiet. She looked up sharply. Immediately? Immediately. The display pulsed green. That response, she said slowly, is statistically rare. I shrugged. Guess I'm special. That is not what I meant, she said, then stopped herself. But noted. As the session continued, something subtle shifted. She stopped reading directly from the protocol. Her questions became less rigid, more curious. When I joked, she almost smiled, catching herself a moment too late each time. At one point, she asked, "Why are you so comfortable with this process?" I considered that. Because you're more nervous than I am. That is not comforting. It's honest. She exhaled, long and slow. I have studied humans extensively. Their psychology, their social bonds, their reputation for impulsiveness. And yet, she admitted, you do not match the risk projections. Give it time. That earned me a sound I later realized was her version of a laugh, quickly suppressed as unprofessional. She looked down at her console, then back at me, eyes lingering a fraction longer than necessary. Your confidence, she said, is disruptive. Been hearing that a lot. It destabilizes predictive models. Models recover. She tilted her head. Individuals do not always. For a moment, the humor thinned, replaced by something quieter. I softened my tone. You okay? She seemed startled by the question. I am conducting the evaluation. Sure, I said. But you're also a person. Or alien. You get what I mean. She studied me, really studied me, like I'd just introduced a concept she hadn't considered applying inward. This test, she said carefully, has never progressed this far this quickly. Is that bad? I do not know, she admitted. Humans were expected to resist. Well, I said, smiling. Sorry to disappoint. The system chimed again, announcing the completion of Phase 1. She jumped slightly, then composed herself. Phase 2 will involve simulated interaction scenarios, she said. Like roleplay? Her eyes flicked up wide. No. The display immediately updated. Correction, interaction simulation with adaptive variables. I grinned. Sure sounds like roleplay. She stared at the console, then at me, then sighed. Humans were a mistake. Maybe, I said gently. But we're here now. She hesitated before activating the next sequence, fingers trembling just enough to notice. You are far too calm for someone undergoing an intimate compatibility evaluation. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. You're far too flustered for someone who thinks this is just science. Her breath caught. The simulation lights began to glow, and whatever carefully controlled expectations she'd brought into this chamber were already unraveling, not because of anything explicit, but because humans, apparently, had a habit of stepping into situations like this and treating them as something personal. And she was starting to realize that was the real test. The lighting shifted again, not dramatically, just enough to signal that something new had begun. The panels around us rearranged themselves, their soft glow forming a loose ring that felt less like a lab and more like a space designed for conversation. The system announced the start of the next phase in a neutral tone, but nothing about the moment felt neutral anymore. This phase, she said, regaining her professional cadence with visible effort, is designed to evaluate adaptive compatibility. Sounds flattering, I replied. It is not meant to be, she said, then paused. But it may be. The first scenario appeared as a simple prompt floating between us. Simulated shared downtime. Emotional exchange encouraged. That's it? I asked. Yes. No questions? No measurements? They will occur automatically. I leaned back, glancing around. So what do we do? She hesitated. Just a second too long. You may speak. I smiled. About? She opened her mouth, closed it, then said, about anything you find relevant. Well, I said, this is where humans usually get dangerous. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Explain. We talk, I said. We fill silence. Sometimes we say things we didn't plan to. That is inefficient. Extremely. The system chimed softly, as if encouraging us. I started with something easy. Life on the station. How strange it felt being one of so few humans among species that catalogued everything, even their pauses. She listened, really listened, posture gradually relaxing as if she'd forgotten to hold herself so tightly before. When I asked about her work, she answered automatically at first, listing credentials, years of study, published findings. Then, slowly, the words changed. The list turned into a story. How she'd requested this assignment because she believed humans were misunderstood. How the compatibility project mattered to her not just as research, but as proof that cooperation could exist beyond treaties and trade. The system pulsed brighter. You care a lot, I said. That is irrelevant. It's obvious. She looked away. Objectivity is required. Objectivity doesn't mean you don't care, I said. It just means you don't let caring blind you. She studied me, eyes searching my face for something, confirmation, maybe, or contradiction. You speak as if you have done this before. Cared? I shrugged. Yeah. The next scenario shifted without warning. Conflict simulation. One participant expresses doubt. She stiffened. This is a hypothetical. Sure, I said gently. She took a breath, then spoke, voice lower, less practiced. I am uncertain whether this process is ethical. I didn't respond right away. I watched her, the way her fingers curled slightly, the way her shoulders tensed. Okay, I said. What part? The imbalance, she said. You volunteered instantly. I did not expect that. It changes the dynamics. How so? You hold the power of choice, she said. And yet you behave as though I do. I smiled softly. Choice isn't power if it's not mutual. The system chimed, a warm tone this time. She blinked. That response was not in the dataset. Datasets are overrated. Her gaze lingered, something like relief flickering across her features. The simulation adjusted again. Shared vulnerability encouraged. She let out a quiet sound that might have been a sigh. Humans adapt too quickly, she said. Occupational hazard. You destabilize controlled environments, she continued. You introduce variables without warning. And yet, I said, you keep running the simulation. Her lips pressed together. Because the results are promising. There it was. Not clinical. Not detached. Honest. I leaned forward slightly. Can I ask you something? She hesitated, then nodded. Within reason. Do you want this to work? I asked. The system went silent. No prompts. No chimes. Just us. She looked at me for a long moment. Then, quietly, yes. The answer hit differently than any protocol result could have. The room seemed to soften around it, panels dimming as if giving us space. That's good, I said. Because I'm not here just to pass a test. Her breath caught. Then why are you here? I considered the question, the way it had shifted from theoretical to personal without anyone officially authorizing it. Because you asked? I said. And because you looked like you needed someone who wouldn't run. She swallowed. Humans are supposed to be unpredictable. We are, I said. But unpredictability isn't the same as unreliability. The system chimed again, louder now. Adaptive compatibility exceeding projected thresholds. She stared at the message, then at me, disbelief and something warmer mixing in her expression. This should not be happening. Maybe it should, I said. She laughed then, a soft, unguarded sound that clearly wasn't meant for data collection. It startled her as much as it did me. She covered it quickly, but the damage was done. The professional distance she'd clung to was gone. You are altering the parameters, she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Good, I replied. They needed adjusting. She leaned back, studying me with a new kind of attention, one that wasn't about species or statistics. If this continues, she said slowly, the evaluation will conclude that emotional compatibility outweighs biological uncertainty. Sounds like a win. It will redefine the project, she said. And my role in it. I met her gaze. You okay with that? She didn't answer right away. Then, with a small, decisive nod, I believe I am. The system announced the transition to final assessment parameters, its tone almost respectful. Whatever lines had existed between subject and researcher were blurred beyond recognition now. And for the first time since I'd raised my hand without thinking, it felt like we were both choosing what happened next. The final transition came without spectacle. No dramatic alarms, no flashing warnings. The room simply settled, lights softening until the panels around us faded into the background. The system's voice returned, calmer than before, as if even it understood this part required a lighter touch. Final assessment initiated. Emotional congruence prioritized. Voluntary continuation required. She froze. Not outwardly. Any observer would have seen the same composed posture, the same careful control, but I'd been paying attention long enough to notice the tension settle in her shoulders. This wasn't another prompt she could reframe as data. This was choice, clean and unprotected. You are not obligated, she said quickly, too quickly. At this stage, participation is optional. Declining will not reflect negatively on you. That sounded rehearsed, I said gently. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them again. I am required to state it. Okay, I replied. Then here's my response. I stood slowly, deliberately, not because the system demanded it but because I wanted her to see the decision forming, not just hear it. I'm staying. The system chimed once, a low, affirmative tone. She stared at me, searching for hesitation, bravado, anything that would let her file this away as a predictable human impulse. You did not request additional information. I have enough, I said. Enough for what? For this, I answered. For you. That finally broke through her composure. Her breath hitched, subtle but unmistakable. This test, she said, voice unsteady now, was never designed to account for willingness without incentive. Then it's outdated, I said. Because I'm not here for incentives. The system updated silently, text scrolling across the panels in a language neither of us was reading anymore. Station viability restored. Cross-species compatibility confirmed. Human variables approved. Somewhere beyond the chamber, the station exhaled. Power levels stabilized. A crisis that had threatened dozens of species quietly resolved itself without ceremony. But inside the room, neither of us moved. You saved the station, she said at last. I shrugged. Team effort. Her gaze softened, no longer guarded, no longer hidden behind procedure. You understand, she said, that this outcome will be studied, replicated, analyzed. Good, I replied. But this part? I gestured between us. That doesn't need replication. She smiled, really smiled, and this time she didn't stop herself. Humans are infuriating. High praise, I said. She stepped closer, not crossing any invisible lines, just closing the distance enough to make the space feel intentional. I expected fear, she admitted. Resistance. negotiation. And instead? I found confidence, she said. Respect. Choice. I met her gaze. You found someone who listened. That may be more dangerous than courage, she said softly. The system chimed again, almost apologetically. Final report pending. Researcher input required. She glanced at the console, then back at me. I must submit my findings. Take your time. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the interface. Once submitted, nothing will be the same. Nothing ever is, I said. That's kind of our thing. She laughed quietly, then began entering her report, not as a list of metrics, but as a narrative. I could tell from the way she paused, revised, reconsidered, that she was writing honestly. When she finished, she didn't send it right away. There is one final requirement, she said, eyes flicking back to me. Hit me. Intent, she said. The system requires confirmation that this connection is not transient. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was unsure, but because this deserved more than an instant response. When I did speak, my voice was steady. I didn't step up because it was easy, I said. I stepped up because it mattered. And it still does. The console pulsed green. She sent the report. Somewhere beyond the walls, notifications would be spreading. Committees would convene. Humans would be reclassified yet again as a species that defied clean categorization. But here, in the quiet aftermath, none of that felt important. What happens now? She asked. I smiled. Now? We figure it out. Together. She nodded, a small, decisive motion that mirrored the one she'd made at the beginning, before everything changed. Humans, she said, have a reputation for arriving unprepared. We prepare fast, I replied. She took a breath, steady this time, and extended her hand, not as a protocol, not as a requirement, but as an invitation. I took it without hesitation. The system powered down around us, its purpose fulfilled. And for once, stepping up instantly had led exactly where it needed to.